Cloud. Recording in progress. Great. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is the first of a series of events that we're going to do this year in the political science department at Chabot College. My name is Dr. Jessica Gallucci, and I am the chair of political science at Chabot College. And I'm really excited to start this series of events. We have some really amazing, truly remarkable students that have come out of the political science major at the Chabot College and the ethnic studies major. I think someone needs to just mute their thing really quick. Happens to me too. And we wanted to sort of highlight what some of our alumni have done. And I think that just having a real easygoing, informal conversation with them can, I think, open up a little bit of knowledge for students, about the different steps that you can take, the different tools that are offered on campus, what to do when you're kind of feeling down, right? And kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm really proud to present Lesly Avendano, who is our first alumni that's going to be highlighted. And Lesly, do you mind if I read your bio?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
it's
all right.
Long, but yeah.
Okay, no, it's great. Okay, so Lesly Avendano is a proud Oaxaqueña and a political science and ethnic studies major from Chabot College. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in legal studies from UC Berkeley. Woo! And while at Chabot, she served as vice president of Student Senate. That's correct, right, Lesly? You were vice president. After transferring to Berkeley, she mentored community college students, right, about getting into Berkeley. She has taught law to youth, which is incredible. She's done what so many students wish to do, which is to actually get a law-related internship. And so many students are interested in immigration law, and that's what Lesly focused on. She took part in the Public Policy and International Affairs Junior Summer Institute program at Carnegie Mellon University. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's an incredible program. At least that's my opinion. Maybe that's my impression. I've never done it. She can tell us more about that. And while she was there, she conducted research around relieving poverty for indigenous Oaxacan youth in Mexico. And before graduating from Berkeley, she conducted an undergraduate research project, which I think not everybody can do. You have to kind of get accepted to be able to do that. And she was actually ended up publishing her undergraduate research work. And that research was called A Case Study on Oaxaqueña's Identities, a study on its political and legal importance. And she is applying to law school at the moment. So everybody, welcome Lesly Avendano.
Thank you. You read it amazing.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone being here, both in the Zoom meeting, but obviously like those who are not able to attend for even just watching it. Yeah, that is me. That's I'm so excited because I think there's so much to cover and so many questions, and like Professor Gallucci said, this is such like an informal sort of conversation that I think I hope I can answer all the questions, but if not, like I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to like contact me. I love talking to people and obviously guiding them through what I went through in some shape or form. I'll do it right now because if not, I'll forget.
Thanks. That's really generous of you, Lesly. So the first question that I have for you, Lesly, here as we get started is a little bit about your background. So can you tell us a little bit about your origins? Where does your family come from, and what impact did they have on your personal and academic journey?
Oh, so it's such a good question to start with, because I think it really connects to sort of the work that I did and I'm doing. So my parents and my family are from Oaxaca, and they're from this pueblo called Ayoquesco del Dama, which is a little far off down from Monte Alban, where are like prehistoric sort of like pyramids and just beautiful, beautiful architecture. And so that is where my parents grew up in Oaxaca, but they actually didn't meet in Oaxaca. They actually met here in California in the route of doing farm work. So I believe they formally met in Salinas, and their parents, actually my grandparents liked each other, like they're buddies, and somehow managed to match make my parents. And so both my parents did farm work in Salinas, Fresno, literally all throughout that sort of region. And so I was born in Salinas and managed to somehow get my way into the Bay Area.
Okay, great. Excellent. So, now we're going to take a huge jump forward, right? You graduated from high school, you came to Chabot College. What motivated you to study political science and ethnic studies?
I think initially what motivated me to study ethnic studies was because I was really lost as to like who I was and what I wanted to do. And because of my parents' history with farm work and farm labor, and my great grandfathers who were part of the Bracero program, I think initially because of that, I wanted to learn more about it. And that is what essentially got me into ethnic studies. Then from there on, I learned that I really wanted to get involved in public service, in sort of changing or at least impacting in some way, like the systematic sort of forms of oppression. And that is essentially then what got me into political science. I think my first political science was yours, if I'm not mistaken. And then from there, I just kind of fell in love and went with it. And I think my love for both ethnic studies and political science is what has influenced me into the research and just the work that I do. Into impacting and of course taking what I've learned from both subjects and merging that into my passions for just like legal rights and civil rights.
Wonderful. That's great. And I have a follow-up question from, I'm not sure, Juan Garen. Do you want to ask it? Sorry. So they ask, how do you think political science and ethnic studies connect to each other? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think initially I thought both of them connected because I understood the importance of having diversity within the political science, like just careers in general. But now as I have read more and sort of like learned more, I think it has transitioned into this sort of merging of the two subjects. In particular, I find it really interesting and really important to talk about how critical race theory and just in general the ethnic studies curriculum should be more taught into political science. And I think I wouldn't want to talk too much about political science department in UC Berkeley because I don't know it, but I think that's one of the faults that it may have, is that it doesn't come through this lens of critical race theory. And I think that's something that is often missing because it fails to really conceptualize, right, the root of all these like issues such as political power, voting rights, all of these, which I think in general are really connected and intertwined.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, I was going to say it's almost like political science wants to describe what's happening right now, right?
Yeah.
And ethnic studies helps to give you the background as to why it is that we are in the situation that we're in right now.
Yes, and sometimes I feel like you can't escape from both.
Right.
But I think it's really important to not not neglect that history.
That's great. Gabrielle, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I just came back from Chabot like right now. I didn't want to miss this meeting. I thought it was very important. I wanted to ask if you have taken the LSAT, and if you have, how did you prepare or study for that? Because I know that's a very important part of applying to law school.
Yeah, I actually took it at the beginning of this month. It went pretty good. I think studying for it is a struggle in itself. I also have plenty of resources that if you would like, I can like help pass out, that help pay for courses and my exam. We can also talk about that process of applying much later on, because I do think that's a question that we'll cover.
Yeah, no, it's an important piece. I want to be sure that we have time to get to it, but thank you, Gabrielle, for highlighting that. We'll get back to that question. And actually, that's good for me to know that maybe students already at Chabot are interested in maybe doing some, at least kind of like mini LSATs, just kind of dipping your feet in the water, kind of see how that goes. Great. All right. So, let's see. So what were some of the challenges you faced as a Chabot student, and how did you navigate those challenges? And also, what types of opportunities and activities help you to survive and thrive at Chabot? I know you were really involved in a lot of stuff, and students don't always know how to get active and how to get engaged and how to kind of catapult yourself, right, towards transfer through, right, getting support at Chabot. So how did you deal with it, and what were the things that you dealt with, and how did you get involved?
I think initially my biggest struggles were finding who I was, what I wanted to do, and along with the help of both you, Kay Fisher and Dr. Gallucci, that was something that I quickly started to learn. But I think other struggles beyond that were probably just being like a first generation student and figuring out how to even transfer, how to take classes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I had wasted a couple of courses that I didn't even need to take because I didn't know. Financially also was a huge toll on me, but because I was the one paying for my own courses. And I think I believe my senior year, at one semester, I had 3 jobs. And so that was a lot to take on top of my extracurriculars. But I think with just a lot of support from my family, and of course, like the friendships that I had taken and grown with at Chabot were of immense help. And I think those friendships were super beneficial because many of them introduced me to resources like the TRIO program, Student Senate. Of course, professors were of amazing help. I believe I was taking a course with Kay Fisher, and we somehow started talking about the establishment of Stable Collective. And so that in itself was another huge resource. And I also, because Chabot is so amazing in its students, I had plenty of friends who had transferred already and who were already just helping me in my applications. One of my best friends, Angela Munoz, who was also an ethnic studies major, along with Ashley Santizos, they all were so helpful in my application process. I believe I'll also just in general love to ask for help. And so whenever I was needing help from anyone, I would go to the 700 building and I would just talk to people. So yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so you utilized friendships, you utilized your faculty, you utilized TRIO. What TRIO program did you access?
I think it should still, there's a TRIO program, and they're, I believe, right next to EOP, or they should be, I don't know. Yeah. And I work there as their student desk assistant, and they helped me with my counseling. They basically set me up to transfer by letting me know that I was on a good track, because for a couple semesters, I didn't even know if I was taking the right classes. I also took part of TAP, I believe, with Christina Tinsley, who then also gave me the encouragement to actually apply to Berkeley, because I also didn't even know if I wanted to apply there until like that semester that I was applying to. So yeah.
That's great. That's amazing. So that's another, I think, a good tip is that getting a job on campus, especially in the 700 building, isn't a bad idea, right? You know, because it's just, there's counselors just like, you know, coming out of the woodwork like at all hours of the day.
Yes.
Like they're used to doing a lot of that student services work that's more face-to-face, is more hands-on. And if you're working next to them, you're going to really just sort of benefit from all of that.
Yeah, of course. I think also in general, even if you weren't even part of the TRIO program, Osabisa Roseby, who heads the program, would just help anybody, even if you weren't part of our program. So as long as you're in the 700, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, Osibisa Roseby is an amazing individual, and I'm not surprised at all that he would help anybody that came, to the Trio area and needed help. That might be a good person to kind of say that you heard about from this event. So yeah, and it's great to see Professor Ukudeva here. Hi, Dr. Ukudeva. Excellent. Okay, so here's our next question, which is kind of you were kind of led into that with the last question that you asked. How did you feel during the transfer application process? And were there any resources that you used to help you through that process of kind of actually, and a lot of students right now, right? The CSU application is out.
Yeah.
The UC Berkeley application, I think, came out yesterday. So people are transferring right now. How did you deal with that whole process?
It was nerve-wracking for sure. And like I said, I had used friends. I had talked to professors. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to transfer to Berkeley, but I had joined TAP. So at least I got some encouragement to do that. I was also part of Starting Point Mentorship program, which was later on I became a mentor. I can drop the page. And so I was part of that, and I was connected with a mentor who then later just helped me with questions that I had about the UC applications. I, in particular, though, really, really highly recommend the Styles program. And I think it's called Experience Berkeley, and they helped me with another mentor. And in particularly, they helped with editing and suggesting edits for my personal statement, which I believe is the most incredible, like most important and highly critical part, because I believe that because UC Berkeley does a holistic review, that sometimes they look just beyond grade, like GPA and in grades. And they really want to hear from you. And so those like personal statements are something that can either make or break your whole application. And I can drop that in the link as well. I mean, in the chat.
Thank you for that. So be sure that you guys, I should do a better job of linking political science majors to those types of resources, but UC Berkeley really has a whole series of different organizations. Most of them kind of around the ASUC, but they're kind of throughout campus that really like are trying to reach out to transfer students and encourage folks to apply and try and diversify the group of transfer cohort of folks coming in. And
yes,
it's a really great resource. Maybe I should maybe that would be a good event to like take students over there and just, walk around the offices and just understand that those types of services exist.
they would love that.
They would love that. Okay. They'd be like, come, community college students, come to us.
Yeah, Andrew, who is in charge of the transfer center, would just absolutely love transfers to just come in there, or before you even transfer.
We should talk offline, and you can help me hook it up. Okay, great. All right. So, right, everybody thinks, okay, got it. Well, if you get into Berkeley, right, you're just going to go, right? You're not going to consider any other school, and you've hit the pinnacle. But there's tons of amazing schools in California. Some folks even go out of state. So it's not a foregone conclusion that you're just going to go to Berkeley because you got in. Why? Like, what brought you to actually selecting Berkeley? What types of considerations went into the calculation for you? And how did you navigate financial aid, right? I'm sure you got into more than one college. How did financial aid work into your decision-making process?
Oh, that's a really good question. I was debating UC Berkeley and I was debating UC Santa Barbara for a really long time, because I believe they have like a pre-law pipeline or something like that. And I was really interested in that. And so I really was up in the air until I got my financial aid package. And so I noticed that UC Berkeley gave the highest financial aid package, which I'm extremely thankful for, because if they didn't, I would have to try to negotiate or something. So I really, that was kind of just like a major factor into why you chose UC Berkeley. I also ended up being really like just fortunate enough to already have a community because I was already part of these programs before even transferring. I already had a lot of friends who had transferred there too. And so I think naturally I wanted to have a community still and to really just still have a support system. And I felt like if I had transferred to UC Santa Barbara, I would have perhaps, worked a little harder to make a community, but I mean, it's totally possible, but I think it really was helpful to already have that from the get-go.
That's a really good point. I never think of it that way, but the fact that you were involved in these programs, but you already had homies, basically, you showed up with like ready-made homies, that must have made it so much less stressful once you got to Cal.
Yeah, definitely.
Jasmine has a question. What was one of the biggest struggles, discouraging hurdles that you felt you had to overcome when choosing this major? And Jasmine, are you talking about the legal studies major or ethnic studies or political science?
I can answer both.
Go for it.
Oh wait, hold on.
Political science. Okay.
That actually, yeah, that was a really tough decision at the time because I believe I had taken mostly ethnic studies classes and I believe like maybe one a political science class, which I think in hindsight maybe I could have reflected a little bit more on that, but I'm still happy I chose political science. I think I chose political science because I was really interested in learning more about sort of just like in general, like the system and particularly making sure that I kept that ethnic studies lens, but incorporated that into my classes. I still kept taking ethnic studies classes, so I was really adamant about, not forgetting like what I had already been learning. But I think I chose political science because I wanted to really learn more about that. And just in particular, I think I found it fascinating to be able to learn about things that I had never been taught before. Because my parents are immigrants and they're from Oaxaca and they didn't really have any formal education. As a US citizen, I didn't know anything about voting or didn't know anything about rights or just in general, like just the power imbalances of this country. And so I think that was what really pushed me to choose political science.
Great. Thanks, Leslie. That's an excellent answer. And I also want to say hi to Professor Kay Fisher, who's here as well with us today. Hi, Professor Fisher. Hi. Okay. All right.
Hi.
It's great to see you here.
Thank you for having this. This is so terrific. And I'm learning so much from you, Leslie. Thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Gallucci.
Thank you. Let's thank each other. Great, thank you. All right, so Azizi has a question. I do not know if this was asked, but what was something that caught you by surprise on the research you conduct? Okay, let's get to that question later. Let's move on really quickly to the next question. Sort of, and that leads in from this question about political science. Why did you choose legal studies? Did you even know that that degree existed when you had to transfer? Did you like find it out like after 2 semesters? Like how did that flow for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I did not know that a major existed at all. I transferred as a political science major, and I believe it was during summer that I took the initiative to really take legal studies classes. So when you transfer to UC Berkeley, you have about, in general, I think 2 semesters to really declare your major, but if it's a really non-impacted major, it's a semester. And if you're really cool with the counselors, it can be that like that within that semester. So I was looking at the catalog of political science courses, and I felt like I had already learned a lot that I from political science at UC Berkeley at Chabot. Sorry, I confused the two. That's how much I love both. And so I felt like the courses were not doing it for me personally. That may be different for other folks. And so then I believe I had a friend who was like, I'm actually a legal studies major. And I was like, what is this? What is that? And so I looked at the courses and I was like, wow, I am so interested in learning about this. And because I knew that I wanted to eventually go to law school, I thought it was really interesting to learn about the legal system and its faults, and then particularly criticize it and critique it through an academic lens. And so that is essentially what at least what I summarize a legal studies major to be. We look at the legal system and sort of its faults, and we critique it, and we also just in general learn about it. And so I took an introductory to legal studies. I also took a human rights legal course, in particular looking through Native American lens and looking at how they separate the courts in especially for juveniles. And so I learned a lot about that, which I had no idea. And so that really kept me wanting to learn more, in particular, just because I had always been interested in immigration law, but I knew that because of my own experience with the immigration system, that it might be a little too much for me. So then I started wanting to learn more about workers' rights and labor issues, employment law, even education. And so all of these were really interdisciplinary subjects that came together. Political science, a department at UC Berkeley, is also very strict and rigid. I believe you have to take the courses that they give you, and that's it. You can't go anywhere else. You can't take sociology, you can't take ethnic studies courses. And I liked how legal studies, many of their courses already had interdisciplinary subjects and just disciplines. But on top of that, you could take an ethnic studies course, a sociology course, because I found that some way, shape, or form, the legal system is something that can be analyzed and critiqued throughout all of these subjects.
Great. That's so fascinating. Was it a challenge to declare that major? Like, did you have to apply for it? Did you just enroll for it? Like, how does that flow? Because I'm sure a ton of students would love that major in political science and ethnic studies would love to make that transition to legal studies once they transfer.
Yeah, it was actually because it's a very small major and not that big. I'll drop the website on the chat too. It was fairly easy. Lori LaPointe, who is the major advisor, is incredibly sweet. And I think within an email chain, she had already told me what classes I wanted to take. And she was like, oh, just choose whatever, just choose whatever. And I'll be able to declare you within the second semester once you take a couple courses. And so that is what happened. In political science, I believe I would have to wait until my second semester, but highly impacted majors are different. You would maybe have to take prerequisites before changing your major once you transfer, because you didn't take that at your CC. It's really hard though, if it's something like business, like Haas, it's really hard to change your major, but it's totally possible. It just may take a little while.
Yeah, I think Haas is by far the hardest one to end up declaring out of already out of the blue, even if you start as a freshman at Berkeley and you change your mind, but even more so for transfer students because of those 60 years you did. Yeah. All right, great. So here's the big question that I always hear about from all my students that have ever transferred to Berkeley when they call me, especially in their first semester, and let me know what it feels like to be a transfer student at Berkeley. Their second semester, they're fine, but their first semester, I get some calls sometimes. What was your experience, Leslie? What did it feel like being a transfer student at Berkeley? And what were some of the difficulties and some of the highlights for you?
I think it was an experience that I can't really fully like just say, but I in particularly enjoyed seeing other Chabot transfers within that same year or even previous years. I found that Chabot transfers are really close and really have a really beautiful connection within each other. I find it some ways weird that other transfers aren't as connected or as informed about their previous institution. And so Chabot transfers are really unique, and a lot of people at UC Berkeley know Chabot transfers to be the exceptional students that we all are. So that's something that is a really good highlight. I think transfers in general have a really good sort of I think it's hard at first, right? We talk a lot about imposter syndrome, feeling like, did they choose the right application? Was it really me who got chosen? And it's it took me a couple weeks to really feel like I was starting to feel somewhat connected to campus. It's really hard because it's a big campus compared to Chabot, that sometimes it still felt like it wasn't a community all in one, but rather various communities. And so I think finding the right people and finding friends is what really helped me find like where I belonged on campus. So I think that would be the negatives. I think just feeling really small at the beginning and really unsure of where your community is. But because again, I had already, been part of these programs, I was at least I know I can go to the transfer center. At least I know I can go to Stiles Hall, and I know I can find some smiles in there, and they'll be helpful. There's also free printing, so I think that's what helped me navigate through UC Berkeley, because it can be hard at first, but as long as you keep going to the spaces that you want to keep going, because I think there's so many opportunities at UC Berkeley that's sometimes overwhelming, and you don't even know that's what you want to do. You just want to do it because it looks fancy and looks good on your resume. But once you really hone in on like what you're interested in and what you want to do, I think it's smooth from there.
Great. That's amazing. I love that story. And this is just so helpful for me. Thank you, Leslie. I'm learning so much from you, right, about the types of things that I should be sort of leading some of the transfer students from Chabot towards. So you're talking about there's so many cool, amazing opportunities and activities at UC Berkeley, and they're kind of being flung at your guys' faces, and you don't quite know what to pick, right? Because they all sound amazing and they'll all look good on your resume. Which one do you pick? Well, one of them that you did pick was the Public Policy and International Affairs program, the Junior Summer Institute. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that program and, the research that you ended up doing? What was the experience like?
It was really intense. I'll say that straight off. But it was such a beautiful sort of cohort that I was able to partake in, that it was totally worth it. The application isn't too bad. I think I had used a lot of my transfer applications, if I'm being honest, in that application. So it wasn't too bad. But I think what I really, really enjoyed was taking courses. I wasn't really too strong in economics, and so they really focused on strengthening that for me, whether I liked it or not. I ended up really just enjoying taking economic courses and outside of the textbooks and conceptualizing it with what I wanted to do, which is why I ended up researching on bracero workers and just sort of the factors, I called it the factors of their existence, and tracing that back to sort of economics, and making that sort of a mini thesis all in one. But because it's a really prestigious program, it was really a lot of work. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was maybe 4 courses. in the summer. And yeah, 4 or 5. I think we had like one leadership class. And I took economics. I also took the leadership course. We took statistics in public policy. And then we took, I think it was like a sociology class or something. And somehow I managed to do all their projects, which consisted of a memo where I talked about Medicaid and expanding it to undocumented workers. And then, of course, I talked about conditional cash programs and expanding that to Indigenous children in Mexico, focusing in Oaxacan youth, because that was sort of where I lied my interest in, but also because a lot of the research was focused on that. As many of you may or not know, Oaxaca is one of like the poorest regions in Mexico, and so a lot of the support programs and a lot of the help that Mexico gives or grants should be at least allocated right to the poorest regions. So that's sort of my focus.
That sounds amazing. So this is a program that happens during the summer session. You did it during COVID, unfortunately, right? So you did it on Zoom, right?
Yeah. So I didn't take any classes at actual Carnegie Mellon, like physically, but I took did take them online. And so it was intense because it was online. It was during summer, but at least I was at the comfort of my home. But yes, this program, you apply, you get there in the summer, you would be there physically, they pay for your tuition, your board, your room and expenses. On top of that, I think they give you a stipend or something like that. After you complete the program successfully, and that means you have to get a B or higher in all of their classes. It may be different for like the university that you're at, the host site, but most of the host sites give you some type of scholarship, some type of stipend, if you end up choosing them as your graduate school. And so for my case, I think I would have gotten like a full tuition and a stipend on top of that if I had chosen to do public policy at Carnegie Mellon, which a couple of my cohort members did. And so it's really an amazing program, and I highly recommend it if you're even just interested in public policy. I'm still debating doing I believe it's like a dual degree, which is a law school degree and a public policy degree at Berkeley or anywhere else. So I believe it's something to apply, even if you don't even know what public policy is. It's really, really incredible. And I think it's something because they really are really interested in having diverse set of students. It's amazing for students like me who are first generation, who are of, immigrant parents, farm workers. I had a lot of cohort members who were from Puerto Rico. And so it's just something that is incredibly vital because this program gives you a full ride tuition and a stipend.
Yeah, it's a really interesting program. And just, if you haven't heard of public policy before, that's not a surprise, right? But really when you're oftentimes public policy will be a subfield in a bachelor's program in political science, right? Some places have them completely overall on their own. So UC Riverside, you can get a bachelor's degree in public policy all on its own. Sometimes it ends up being like one of the subfields of political science where you kind of get an emphasis in it. And some people don't really transition towards, I would say vast majority of people don't really transition towards public policy until their master's level, right? So maybe they get an undergrad degree in sociology, then they move towards public policy or political science and so forth. But really public policy is kind of taking, I guess the best way I can say this colloquially is sort of getting into the weeds, getting into the nitty gritty of actual the actual design of legislation, and specifically the actual design of the way that certain policies that are created by legislation actually end up getting rolled out in reality on the ground for families, for states, for counties and communities, and also doing some of the research to try and advocate for legislators or for regulators or for, you know, folks in the executive branch, whether that be on the state level, national level, county level. Hey, this is how you should design your Medicaid program. This is how you should design your early child education program. This is how actually you should decide who qualifies for food stamps and who doesn't, right? So it's kind of getting into, it's a little bit less abstract than most of political science, which is, I think, a lot more.
Yeah.
It's a step removed from the legislation, and it's kind of, I think, a little bit more investigating, you know, forces of power, right, in a whole series of different arenas. Okay, so last two things I want to ask you about, Leslie, are your undergraduate research program as a senior, and then we'll talk about law school. So tell us about doing undergraduate research.
So I did undergraduate research under the honors program of my particular major. And so I had to apply for that, like you mentioned, and apply for it. And I think I had to have at least like some GPA requirement of like 3.8 GPA. Sorry if you heard the plane. And so I had to basically look at, let me wait for the plane. So I applied to this research program because I was really interested in doing my own particular research. And so I had already been part of a research cohort where I transcribed and I looked at interviews of women in particular in countries like Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, etc., and their experiences with climate change. In particular, I focused on Indigenous women and youth. And so I wanted to take my research and look at Indigenous communities and look at that through the lens of legal studies. And so because of that, my framework was really much a lot of looking in at identity and immigration status, and how they viewed their own legal identity per se. And so that is really what encapsulated my whole honors thesis. And because I centered it around Oaxaca, I looked at a lot of migration patterns. I focused on the Bracero program. I focused on NAFTA a little bit. And looked at sort of farm workers and that demographic. And eventually my research was really something meaningful to me because it allowed me to look at my own particular community and look at, you know, how do they view themselves, how in this sort of transnational identity. And so it was really interesting to learn how different people view their identity legally, politically, and just in general, like personally. And so I looked at a lot of interviews that I had conducted, and I found just how important legal organizations are in choosing who they have as, you know, partners, or who they employ, who they have as caseworkers. I think that's sort of like my main finding, I want to say, besides, you know, looking at identity and looking at legal concepts. I find it highly rewarding to feel like I was able to find how important people felt, you know, going to a legal organization and knowing that they spoke Mixtec or Triqui or Zapotec, etc., and finding how that then influenced how they chose to seek or not seek legal help, right? And then looking at that and seeing how they saw other organizations who didn't speak Indigenous languages and how they were able or not able to assist them. And although they valued those same organizations, they felt within community with organizations like Cielo or et cetera. And so I think that is something that really allowed me to shed light on how legal organizations play a critical role into how legal rights then are given out or are seeked in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that was something that I found really important in my thesis and my research. Because I also took this through like a political sense, um, our lens, I then sort of merged that finding into how legislations, how political figures then could understand the importance of identity, the importance of legal actors, of legal organizations, and how in particular for this community, how that impacts then legislations or immigration status, etc. And so I think that was also something that was really important to me. Personally, I found that I was able to also interview my dad. And so that really was something emotional for me. And I was able to understand him a little more and also understand his complex identity as a former farm worker and someone who has been in the US for I want to say about almost 25 years and still has not been able to get his US citizenship. And so then looking at that through this sort of legal studies lens and being like, okay, he's you know, he has a complex legal identity in that, you know, he's still in touch with Oaxaca. He still listens to the radio, to the news. He still practices his culture. But also he finds himself, you know, in California and he refers to himself as Oaxaca Californian, which is, you know, this also concept and word that I introduce that was coined by a famous other researcher of Oaxacans. And so he talks about, you know, how Oaxacans have created this unique community of living in California, but of course being Oaxacan. And so that in a sense can be a word, it can be a meaning, it can be a location, it can be an identity. And that's also something that I found really powerful because I then I think that is essentially my research title, right? Why this Oaxacan's identity is so legally and politically important into their rights mobilization.
That's beautiful. I mean, you're basically describing a highly complex research project, right? That you would normally see somebody undergo in a master's or even a doctorate program. And you know, you were able to do that as a senior, but probably more importantly, from my point of view, it sounds like it was a really transformative experience for you, right? Like being able to understand family better and probably in the process understand yourself better, right?
Yeah, I think it was a beautiful experience personally for me because I was able to recruit all of my participants just hearsay and online, and so many of them I knew through other activists or through other forms of platforms. And so it was something that I feel like really brought me closer to my community, but also in general it made me much more confident in my identity, I would say, because for a long time I wasn't sure of who of what I maybe I wouldn't say classify myself as, but I would like, you know, refer to myself as. I think for a long time I just would say I'm Oaxacan or I'm an immigrant or whatever. But now I feel much more empowered and much more comfortable to say like that I label myself as an Indigenous person. And so that is something that I was able to talk with many of my participants that even though they had connections to the Oaxaca, many of them, because they were born in the US or because they weren't in Oaxaca physically, they didn't feel confident enough to say that. And then I talked to older generations who were like, no, you are Indigenous. And that, you know, obviously the loss of tradition and the loss of culture and the loss of language is something that, your generation needs to obviously continue working on, but that doesn't necessarily take away your identity. And so that was also something that I talk about in my thesis, the difference between older generations and newer generations, and how they view their identity. Of course, many of them don't view it the same. In particular, my father also considers himself a US citizen, even though he's not legally, right? Which is another finding of just legal identity. But others would say, no, I'm not US, I'm not Mexican, I'm just from my pueblo. Or others would say, I'm just Oaxacan, or I am Mexican in the US. And so identity is a complex thing. And so that's also something that I talk about.
That's beautiful. That's really lovely. I love that. You came out of the experience saying, I am Indigenous. I mean, that's for sure the deepest thing that we could just give me. I'm sure that's a life-changing reconceptualization of self. I love
Yes,
that.
yes.
I love that. So let's turn hard right to something that's way less meaningful probably, but still important.
Yeah.
A lot of the students who I think are here are probably interested in applying to law school, right? You're at Chabot, it seems like a million miles away, but I think it's really helpful to kind of hear from somebody that's going through the law school application experience to kind of get yourself mentally ready and prepared. So how is your law school application process going? What types of steps have you taken? And what does it feel like? Like kind of the feeling side, what does it feel like applying to law school?
Oh, it feels surreal. It also feels a little overwhelming, and at times it can feel like you're not even in the process of working on your application. It just feels like you graduated and like what's next. So I think my process of application started, I believe, the summer I graduated, or even a little bit more. And so I started working on my personal statements, updating my resume, and then of course trying to find out which law schools that I wanted to apply for. I was part of a program called Level Bar, I believe my junior and senior year at UC Berkeley. And so I was already thinking about the LSAT. I was already thinking about my applications. It really was just, I need time to work on them. And so I connected with them and started, working on my applications, and I was able to get a mentor and look at my statements. Summer, I had applied to, I want to say I applied to like maybe 3 or 4 programs. Yeah, 3, and I got into all of them, which was a little overwhelming because maybe I should have prioritized my time a little bit more in choosing which ones. But all of them gave me like a free Kaplan course. They helped me with expenses to take the LSAT. I also was able to get mentors in some of them who looked at my statements, who looked at my resume. And so I took a Kaplan course. I took several Kaplan courses for about, I want to say, 5 months.
Okay.
And then I took the LSAT this October. So I took the LSAT October 15th, I believe. And I got my score. Actually, I'm waiting on my score because I need to wait on something. But so then that's what's happening currently. I have gotten my 4th revisions on my applications, so I'll be editing those soon.
4 series of revisions.
Yeah, for my program, and I think I've done a little bit more, but yeah, which is a little intense, but it's much needed. And after that, I just plan on taking up some part-time position offers just for the meanwhile, while I continue to see if I want to increase my LSAT score, and then of course apply. I think I'm holding off on actually submitting my applications because I find that increasing my LSAT score is something that I really want to prioritize financially. Because I think I feel like I'd be able to get into a law school if I just applied, like I think that's possible. But I think the one thing that restricts me a little bit from that is just how much law schools prioritize like the LSAT scores in giving you scholarships and giving you financial aid, and also in just negotiating your financial aid package, and in wanting more money. And so that is also something that I've taken into consideration into why I feel like raising my LSAT score might be a little bit of might be a more of a priority at the moment. I do feel ready in terms of my resume, my personal statement, my diversity statement, everything else. So that's where I'm at, just editing those. And of course, getting backtrack on a law school, a part-time law school position of like an assistant or something. So
Okay, beautiful. So it sounds like you applied to a bunch of different programs that that basically are set up to essentially assist you through the process.
Yeah.
Great. Do you have time, Leslie, for
Yeah,
a
of
couple
course.
of questions from the audience? Amazing. Okay, so I have Dr. Ukadiva with a question.
Oh yeah. Hi, Leslie. Good
Hello.
to see you.
See
I
you.
think you took my international relations class.
Yes, I
I'm not
did.
sure.
Yeah,
Yes,
I was
that's
gonna say
right.
hi.
I remember you doing report on biodiversity on Oaxaca. I think.
Yes.
That's
Oh
right.
my gosh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
Yes.
right. Okay. So I heard you mentioning several times today that you had mentors in undergraduate studies at Berkeley at several different stages. So, and I know that having mentor is very critical. Many people say that the reason why they become successful in achieving the goals is because they got a mentor. So would you give a few pointers to our students on how to find a mentor? How do you approach? How do you choose a mentor?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think at Chabot, my approach was a little more different. I think it was more personal. It was much more something that I loved, just connecting with professors, and it just happened naturally. It wasn't something like, can you mentor me? I think it just happened.
So
I think,
asking, so don't be shy, approach people and ask directly, right? Could you please be
yeah.
my mentor? You did that.
I didn't do that at Chabot. I did that naturally. I would, of course, ask for letters of rec, that I would do, but I wouldn't ask them to be my mentors. I think we just established a good like relationship. At UC Berkeley, it was a little more different. I think I would be a little more proactive because I felt it was a huge class, and of course you had to really just ask them because they don't really have personal connections, and it's not as easy as it is at Chabot. So there I would of course visit their office hours more. I would email them more. I would talk with them after class about the readings, about their own personal research, which many of them designed as assignments. And of course, I would end up essentially then and asking them for an opportunity, or asking them if they could refer me to something. And then in that sense, I asked them, to kind of mentor me and guide me through that. For like outside in general through these programs, and I can also drop those programs. I try to find all the links. I essentially, I would get linked up with a mentor. I wouldn't ask. I would just, it happened through the program itself. But of course, keeping those relationships are incredible beyond just the program, like after it ends. And so, I also love to keep up with professors and people that I have connected professionally and just also personally. And so I always like to update people with emails. I like to send cards sometimes, which I've sent some to Gallucci. And so I think that's something also, to be proactive in that sense, to also, after transferring, after graduating, after completing a program, make sure to keep in touch, to say, hey, actually, the work that I did in your program or in your class or wherever, it actually has helped me, in this new field, or it's helped me in my job, or it's helped me find a new interest in something. And so I think that, you know, continuing that relationship is really important. In my PPA program, the thesis that I had done in bracero workers wasn't the same thesis that I had published, right? But I still talked to them afterwards, and I told them, hey, you actually, you know, helped me sort of start this, even in just a little, at least with the bracero program. And so I think that's something to be said, you know, to always go back and say thank you, or look at what I'm doing now.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I want our students to know that it's important to speak up and approach, and not be afraid and not be shy, and approach people and ask to be mentor or advisor. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
such a great point, Dr. Ukadiva, because I know that, right, when you're at Chabot, it is one type of an experience, right? But when you do transfer to the UC, there's just a huge number of students, and there's a huge amount of pressure, right, on a lot of different faculty members, and, you know, getting involved in programs or sticking your neck out and just kind of saying, hey, help me, can really be so important. Any of the other students that have logged in, do you guys have any questions for Lesly? Gabriel, did you feel like your question got answered? Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Great, thanks, Paula.
I don't know if you said you were holding off on sending your applications to law school, but how did you go about deciding, or if you have, like where you're going to send your applications, or what school fits, I guess, your goals? Or I don't know if you want to go into like
yeah, of course.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to word my question, but yeah, basically just how to go about finding a law school that fits you.
That's a good question, because I feel like I'm still in the process of that. But at least where I'm at, I think I have prioritized them having, you know, clinics, or at least some sort of programs in my interest. Because my interests are so spread out, I have really a long list of law schools that I was interested, but now I have prioritized that. And I was just talking to that with Dr. Gallucci about where I want to work, or particularly what demographics do I want to work with. And so I have, because I want to work, I don't even think I've mentioned this, but I'm really interested in the intersections, or the link between immigration and workers' rights, labor laws, etc. So that's where I'm at. More working with employment law rather than immigration law. I'm also really interested in education, looking at student rights and also civil rights, but civil rights is such a huge encompassing field that it really can be a lot. So that's where I'm at, or at least in my interest at the moment. And so I've been really focusing on looking at law schools that have clinics, that have internship opportunities, that have professors who do that sort of type of research or work. And of course, the demographics. I want to work with in the Central Valley, perhaps, or at least in California, looking at farm workers and labor laws, employment issues. And so that's why I've sort of focused my list of law schools in California, in the Bay Area a little bit. There's not many law schools in the Central Valley. So that's where I'm at. I've also have a couple schools that are in the East Coast, just to apply for the heck of it, but also because I want to have the ability to negotiate my financial aid package. Basically what I do or have is a list of law schools, and I've ranked them through, I've listed them through their rank or similar ranks. And I've trying to really keep that in track, because I'm hoping that in the future, if I don't get a financial aid package offer to a law school that I want to go to, that I'll be able to say, hey, this other law school who has a similar rank to yours gave me a little bit more money. Can you give me more, etc. And so that's a process that I'm hoping to do all the way from my last law school to my first top choice, etc. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm still debating whether I want to apply to some East Coast schools just because of the out-of-state tuition, if I'm being honest, but I also wouldn't want to close a door on me just because. I also really want to stay with the community that I want to work with, and I find it might be a little bit more easier to get internships or to work at an organization that I'm already familiar in the Central Valley if I stay in California. So that's why I'm a little leaning more towards California. I hope that answered your question.
Great, awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? You should, when you're done with that, you need to like do like a session like hacking, negotiating your law school scholarship
I'll try.
.org or .com.
Yeah. I'll try.
Any other questions, you guys? Don't be shy.
That was a good question though. Of course. Feel free to contact me also if you have more questions that you don't think about. I'll drop my email again in the chat if anyone else missed it.
And you guys, by the way, I'm gonna take this recording once it's uploaded, put it up on YouTube, and I will include all of these links that Leslie is keeping here in the chat so that you can resource them. Obviously, I won't put your email in there, Leslie, but these different links of all these different programs that you've taken advantage of, I'll link them in the YouTube description, so you guys can always go back to that. I wish I had the ability to email that to all of you guys. Anyway, check out, I'll send it to all the professors who have sent students here today. Okay, all right. So everybody, can we give a virtual round of applause to Leslie, and thank her so much. Thank you guys, it's amazing. Thank you, Leslie. You've been so generous, so lovely. So thorough in really sharing with everybody kind of the different ways that you have strategized and kind of arrived at this amazing position that you're at right now. And you've done it all while remaining grounded in your identity and grounded in the community and not kind of like letting all this stuff deviate you, right, from what your original path was. So that's a really beautiful balance that you have been able to achieve. And that's amazing.
Of course. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Honestly, I love talking and mentoring. And of course, I think sharing the resources that I was able to obtain and learn about, I think that's something that I'm really passionate. Also, I realized I never dropped my research if anyone is interested in reading it.
Yes.
I'll find it. It's right here. Yeah. There you go.
Amazing. That's great. I love it. Okay. So Lesly Avendano, published research, Chabot College Political Science and Ethnic Studies alumni. Well, now you guys have heard a little bit about what she did and how she did it. This is our first event. Join us for our next one. Thank you so much, Leslie. And I'll hope to see you guys soon on our next event.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.